The political signalling comes in that they've used a missile, whether or not it's an intermediate or intercontinental missile, that is usually associated with large nuclear weapons.
I'm just interested to get your perspective on the news in the last few hours today on Thursday at lunchtime that Russia has launched an intercontinental ballistic missile for the first time. A weapon, it's reported, of this range is being used, targeting the Dnipro region. No use of casualties at this particular point, 2 fires caused. And Ukrainian air defences shot down 6 of 7 Kh-101 cruise missiles during the same attack. It's reported by Reuters, I think. The Air Force has said. What's your take on that? Is this a significant upping of the ante?
There's a political message in here. There's a lot of backwards and forwards about what the actual missile was. And I've seen anonymous statements attributed to US officials saying it wasn't an ICBM. Now, that might be because what is being rumoured is an RS-26. It's an intermediate range ballistic missile. I mean, this is where everything is relative. So we talk about ATACMS and Storm Shadow as being long-range missiles. ATACMS is a very small ballistic missile with a range of 300 kilometres. We suddenly then move up to something that's intermediate range, which means close to 5,000 kilometres. Now, the reason why this comes into play is that the RS-26 was supposed to have been retired, or the program had been stopped. It was originally designed as an ICBM, but mostly trialled at shorter ranges. It breached the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Why does this all matter? Well, first of all, the Russians have got more accurate weapons, like those Kh-101s, and they have lots of shorter range ballistic missiles that they could use anyway, although using something like this gives it a better chance of getting through air defences. The political signalling comes in that they've used a missile, whether or not it's an intermediate or intercontinental missile, that is usually associated with large nuclear weapons. You know, they have other, like the Iskander, again, short-range ballistic missile that they use could carry a nuclear warhead. But this is the kind of thing that these are city-killing nuclear weapons. And so by putting this into the mix,
the timing
they're playing around with ambiguity over what is this. It's not hugely accurate by comparison, but it just introduces doubt. It's the escalation response that they make in response to things like ATACMS and Storm Shadow, which is saying, well, we have these other missiles, much longer ranges, you can't get them, but we can hit you with them. And I think they are partly messaging the Ukrainians. It's a little bit of, again, reminding international backers of Ukraine that Russia is a major power with a large ballistic missile stockpile of different types.
You mentioned Kyiv has been under sustained attack in the last few days, and in another development in the last few days is that the US embassy, Spanish, Italian, Greek, were closed on Wednesday when the US delegation said it had received information of potentially significant Russian air attack. And it proves the strength of US intelligence, obviously, but it does raise the question. I mean, I don't know whether, again, this is something that Russia wants to be seen to have been potentially planning this, and that actually, you never know quite what is behind the information that comes out. But what would the consequences be if US sovereign territory, in the terms of an embassy, was deliberately targeted by Russia?
I think it would be pretty serious. And we recall, you can go back to the major diplomatic fallout that happened when the US accidentally hit the Chinese embassy during the war in Kosovo, when they struck Chinese embassy in Serbia. And I would note there has been some interesting speculation that was this intelligence, or was this as a result of the Russians notifying the US and others of potential ICBM use? So I don't know what actually triggered that warning. It could certainly have been intelligence of a forthcoming major attack, but there's a little bit of a suggestion that what if this was because the Russians said they might launch an ICBM? They would claim they're fulfilling their ICBM notification obligations. And that's actually what caused it. Except, of course, it was Dnipro that was struck, not Kyiv. There's lots of Russian games going on here, and there's a bit
Yeah.
of us trying to pass what's going on. But the consequences would be significant. And I think there's always the danger that what happens is the Russians claim it's an accident or that it's simply a fact of war. And you've got the ambiguity over other Russian disruptive activity. So I come back to not being blasé about escalation because, of course, there's a Russian sabotage campaign going on across Europe. They have options to interfere elsewhere. They could conduct more threatening testing. They could support proxies in other countries. They could be diplomatically unhelpful. Russia has got a lot of tools to use, and that is partly why there needs to be a high degree of solidarity and coordination, not just militarily, but diplomatically amongst supporters of Ukraine.
And just finally, Matthew, we look back to where we started 1,000 days ago when you were on the operations and crisis team at the Ministry of Defence in the wake of the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Can you just tell me, rewind back to that moment, how you got that news and what you were doing and how you now reflect on that moment with the benefit of hindsight?
I mean, there's the big picture, which in terms of how people thought this would go, and then there was what I was doing. I mean, strictly speaking, what I was doing when the news came through was sitting at home with COVID, because I had been preparing for the invasion and had done lots of the preparation work and the media briefing. I think it was with James Heapy the Thursday beforehand. And if you remember, we were warning along with the US that the invasion was imminent and people thought it was coming that weekend. And in the end, it was delayed by a few days and it happened on I think it was the Tuesday night into Wednesday. But in the interim, I tested positive and I was sitting at home. I was stuck at home for a few days. Basically, mostly watching along with everybody else on the news. And this thing that we had been expecting for months happening with this sense of sort of depressing inevitability, like it had felt like it was coming. The big picture is that what people were gearing up for was a pretty horrendous but potentially short, open conventional war, moving into some deeply uncertain occupation, guerrilla war, European response to what was felt was going to be a significant taking of Ukrainian territory. And there's been a bit of analysis recently and backwards and forwards that was because we wildly underestimated the Ukrainians and essentially dismissed them. And I think that is retrofitting the argument. I think it was sound analysis that was the Russian aim was to charge towards Kyiv and decapitate the government. And the balance of forces that they had lined up should have enabled them to do that. And the Ukrainians hadn't effectively prepared. Like large parts of the Ukrainian system were in denial until very late on. What it turns out, looking back, was that, yes, we had actually underestimated to a degree we had underestimated Ukrainian, if you like, civil resistance and some factors that went their way in terms of flooding areas. We had also overestimated Russian capabilities and their organization. Critically, we didn't know that they were invading. Like, it turns out that most of the forces built up on the border didn't know that they were actually invading. And then things piled up. I think the big lesson is just how much warfare doesn't go to plan. Like, that fog of war is real and it exists and it creates friction, as the Prussian writer Clausewitz called it. And things really spiral out of your control.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to add to as I know I said it was the final question, but just to add to that, I mean, in that light, interesting that what initially, certainly from the Russian side, they might have seen as kind of a coup, a 10-day short, sharp coup to overthrow Kyiv, turned into and evolved over time into what's now a war of attrition, but actually it is becoming an era-defining conflict.
Yes, and I think that is the thing that we did not really prepare for. If I'm honest, What didn't happen then was the second we went into crisis mode, like we responded to the crisis. And as soon as it appeared that the Ukrainians were actually going to be able to hold a line, you saw people taking decisions to get more support in. We provided some weapons beforehand, but really ramp it up. People like Ben Wallace really leading the charge, bringing the Americans in, Europe sending lots of aid, the turning point in Germany. But what we didn't do was prepare for actually that complete change to European security. We didn't immediately turn on the taps on defense industry. Defense spending didn't jump. I think it has been striking, if we were to be self-critical, how long it has taken to treat it as a profound change in European and maybe international security, rather than a crisis to be managed. And what we've really done is manage the crisis in, if you like, 6 month, 12-month chunks. Only now are we really grappling with, okay, we really do need to increase defense spending. We really do need to reassess global relationships. I think there was a fair criticism there that we still to think through the global implications and take action in the wake of that.
Matthew Savill, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you for your time.
No problem.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.